Watercolor illustrations are so often full of whimsy. No two artists will paint a cup of tea or a mitten quite the same way, and I think that's what's really interesting about today's exercise. So let's get started. Hi friends, welcome back. My name is Shada, and today we are doing some winter watercolor illustrations. Here's the design that I've come up with. I worked out all of the things that I want to paint in my sketchbook first, and I will be showing you how to draw everything. Today I'm using a mechanical pencil. It's from Pilot, used HB lead. I also have a fine liner. You can use any Sharpie though, or whatever you have on hand. Some scrap paper is good to have for your drawing. And then today I'll be working on cold pressed 140-pound watercolor paper. I always link that in the description. We'll also use a piece of tracing paper in order to transfer the design, and we'll talk about how to do that in a few minutes. And then as far as painting supplies go, I am using this great new set of watercolors from Mungyo. This is like my new favorite paint set. I'm in love with the color selection. The pigment quality is fantastic. It comes in this nice tin. So I will link that in the description if you are interested in purchasing that. It's a really good price. And then I have three, I was going to say four, but there are three brushes here, and these are sable hair brushes. So they're very good quality animal hair brushes. I've got 2 glasses of clean water, some paper towel for blotting, and the brushes, same thing. If you are interested, those will be in the description. So what I want to do here is draw everything that I'm going to paint, and I'm starting in the very center with just a really simple branch because I love painting leaves, and this will sort of give me something to draw all the other things around. So I've got a branch in the center, and then everything else kind of is sitting surrounding this branch, although I did do some little berries up in the top corner as well. Some little winter berries is another cute thing that we can paint. And then from there we're going to get a little bit more complex or complicated, and we're going to draw some mittens. For the mittens, you just want to do the big U shape first and then add a thumb. That will help you keep the mitten balanced when you're trying to draw it. And I like to do these little heart shapes to show a kind of cable knit stitch. Next, let's work out our snowshoes. Start with 2 lines to indicate where each snowshoe will be. That's going to help you draw them more evenly, and also the fact that they intersect can really throw you off when you're doodling these. So 2 lines to begin, and then the shape of the snowshoe is really just a diamond with rounded corners, and make a large border for where the wood would be. And then I'm going to do a little pine sprig. The key here is to draw the branch in the center, and then all the pine needles sort of go off in every which direction. So they're very uneven, and I'm doing a very simple little pine cone as well. And then I'm going to sketch out a candle holder. I burn a lot of candles in the winter. For this one, I'm adding a little bit of, I guess, depth or dimension, because we're rounding all the edges so you can see sort of into the candle holder. And then the candle itself is just sort of a rectangular shape, but I've given it this big melty wax top. And I'm doing a mug of hot tea or coffee, keeping it very simple. So these are just all the things that make me think of winter, and I wanted to do a winter illustration that wasn't Christmassy. The final thing we're going to sketch is our bird. Now this is not hard. You start with an egg shape, which I think is fitting for a bird. And then on the side of the egg, you're going to put a little wing, and then this tail, 2 simple like thin stick legs. And then let me just show you again here. The wing is on the side of the egg, and then when there's no face, you just put a little beak and then 1 eye. And then you can kind of reshape the bird a bit, put a bit more of a breast there instead of a smooth egg shape. But this bird is foolproof. I promise you can draw him, and I really hate drawing animals and birds. Okay, so there is our sketch all done. Now what we're going to do is trace everything, and this gives you the chance to, I say it in every video where we trace, keep what you like and change what you don't. So you're really refining your own illustration by tracing it. If you want to make something just slightly bigger or slightly more curved, you can do that. And you can change the placement of your items. And what I wanted to do here was the mug was on a weird angle. I didn't want everything angling to the left. I wanted this to be a little more straight. So I was able to do that really easily with the tracing paper. And now you can see my final design there. I've just done a really simple sketch of everything, and now what I want to do is use this trace to transfer it onto the watercolor paper, and we're going to put a piece of carbon paper under there, but you can also just add a layer of graphite with your pencil to the back of the traced image, and you can transfer it in the exact same way by going over everything with a nice sharp pencil. Lift up the transfer paper and tracing paper, and you can see our image has been transferred, and now we are ready to paint. So I'm going to mix up some colors. Well, I have mixed up quite a few colors. You probably noticed my palette is already covered. And the thing is, what I like to do before I start a painting like this that has a lot of different items is mix up my colors ahead of time so that you know the color palette that you'll be working with. I've got a dark green and a nice mossy green. And then lately I've been really into mixing brown into my green. You'll notice when it hits the page, it's a wonderful natural look to mix some brown leaves in with your green ones. I'm also mixing up an ivory color, and I do that by mixing a lot of white and water with a bit of brown as well. So I'm going to use different kind of shades of cream and ivory and brown and gray. And the first thing we're going to do, and I would encourage you to do this as well, is just take a piece of scrap watercolor paper and work out your color palette. So get your paints mixed up on the lid of your palette or on a palette or whatever. So today I'm mixing up a dark evergreen, a mossy green, I've got a bit of navy blue, I've got this nice honey colored brown, and then I am also have that ivory that I mentioned, a little bit of gray maybe I think would look good in there. And finally, a really dark purple. So now I have my color palette mixed up, and it gives me a preview of the colors I'll be using in the piece, and it really sets you up for success when you start painting. Now before we start our painting, I want to take just a moment to mention that I have a new Watercolor ECourse that's available for you to enjoy. This course is over 25 video tutorials, and in the ECourse I really get in depth on subjects like color mixing and color theory, as well as supplies, which brushes and paints do we use and what do I love. So all of the little things that we sometimes don't have time to talk about in detail on YouTube, that's what this course is really all about. So if you're thinking about learning watercolor this year in 2020, consider purchasing the course. It's available for $70 US, and once you've purchased it, you'll have lifetime access. So you can take the course at your own pace and enjoy all the videos as many times as you like. Head to my website for all the details and to read the course syllabus. Okay, I'm going to start painting with something simple, the pine sprig. So I'm using a really dark chocolate brown that was not in my palette, but I decided to add this very dark, rich brown. And I'm just carefully going over the stem or the branch in the center. And then I'm coming back in with that evergreen, that really dark green that I mixed up. And I've got a lot of paint in the brush, but I'm only using the very tip of my brush, the very end, to release just a thin, delicate line of paint. And some of these lines are going to be a little thinner or a little lighter in color. And we're just going to keep it very delicate, very easy, and just run your brush across the surface of the paper quickly to get that very thin, delicate branch, or pine needle, I should say. And don't overdo the pine needles. Leave lots of space in there. Then I'm using that honey brown to color in the pine cone, and maybe add a little bit of a darker brown, and then we'll walk away. We'll add detail to that, but not until it is dry. Then I'm using my ivory color that I mixed up. This is just a lot of white and water with a hint of brown. and I'm coloring in or painting in these mittens. I'll do some just simple vertical brush strokes on the cuff of the mitten, leaving a bit of white negative space there. And you can see me doing the same thing here. So leave some white negative space and just do these vertical brush strokes for the cuff of the mitten. And then let's do some leaves. I love to paint leaves, you know this. And we do these leaves by just doing 1 or 2 brush strokes. So drag that belly of the brush across the page once or twice, and then use the tip of the brush to refine the shape of the leaf or to add a little more color or a little more pigment. So drag the belly of the brush once or twice, and then you can always refine the shape ever so slightly. And as I mentioned when I was doing the palette, I'm really loving mixing brown into my green. And when I paint these leaves, some are green, some are very light green, and then some are almost brown. And I think that has a nice natural look and a very wintry look as well. I'm going to pick up that honey brown again that I used for the pine cone, and I'm going to paint the snowshoes. Of course, we had to do old-fashioned snowshoes. There's just something about new snowshoes that wouldn't quite fit in this painting quite as well. Chris and I just purchased snowshoes, actually. We're trying to get out and enjoy winter a little bit more this year. That is one of our goals or resolutions, is to kind of, instead of hiding from the snow, like get out and really embrace it. And it's a lot better out there when you actually have like full gear snowshoes and snow pants. So it's making the difference. Anyways, so now that I have the brown done, I'm taking a bit of gray, and just like the pine needles, you want a good amount of paint or moisture in your brush, but then you're just using the very tip of that brush and running it over the page quickly and very lightly. And we're going to do these very thin lines in a crisscross pattern here. And I think the gray looks nice. Typically, it would actually be sort of an ivory color that this mesh would be, but I think the gray just looks better and pops off the page a little more. And then I'm mixing up a very light gray. So what I'm doing here is mixing gray with lots of water and a bit of brown and a bit of purple. And we're going to paint the shadows on the glass candle holder. I mixed quite a bit more water into that paint that you just saw. That was sort of the color that I wanted, and then I mixed in way more water. So purple and gray and brown gives me this nice warm gray. And I'm using my brush to go over the outline of the glass candle holder, and then I'm doing that with just the tip, so going around the outline, and then I sort of use the belly of the brush to lay down some splotches of that light gray to give the look of glass. So the splotches are very random, and that's a good thing. And then I'll use a bit of black to go over the rest of that candle holder, the handle. And then I'm using this sort of warm gray color that I mixed up. This is a little darker, of course, but I'm using that color to paint the mug. I want this to look like a nice piece of pottery. I've been getting lots of nice comments about my pottery collection lately. I have a bunch of different candle holders and mugs and all kinds of things, and I tend to pick them up either at gift shops in little tourist towns where there are potters working, or thrift stores. Thrift stores are like pottery hotbeds. There's so many great pieces out there that get tossed away. So always be on the hunt when you go to that thrift store or Salvation Army. And then I'm using this dark brown. I used it for the coffee or tea that's in the mug, and then again for the branch. I had to draw this branch in because weirdly I forgot to transfer it. And then I'm using that purple color and painting some berries, and you can see I just use the tip of the brush, add a bit of pressure, and try to paint these circles. They're very perfectly imperfect. They're all a little different, and some of them are a little darker and some are a little lighter, and on the lighter ones, that's where the color really comes through. Okay, and then we are done almost everything, and so it is time to paint our bird. Now don't be scared of the bird. I was a bit, but you shouldn't be. I'm taking that extremely light gray, that very watery gray, and I'm doing a bunch of vertical brush strokes, really random brush strokes, but I'm leaving a bit of space between them so that I get the look of feathers. So you can see there's some negative space there, there's some page showing through. I've allowed the paint to become a little darker towards the bottom of the bird's breast, so it's a lot lighter up towards his little face, and then I've added a bit more pigment as we head down towards his rump. I don't know. Okay, and then I'm using that dark, sort of a mix of the dark brown and the honey brown. And I'm doing the same thing with the wing. I'm doing these long brush strokes, but I'm leaving a bit of negative space, and that is going to help with the look of feathers. So whether it's the very, very light gray on his breast, or the brown on his head, or the really dark brown on his wing, you're going to just try to leave negative space and paint in these short brush strokes, these vertical brush strokes that don't quite meet. And I think that helps with the look of the feathers. He looks very feathery, and that's good because he's a bird. And you can see I've added some water here to my brown, and I am using a bit of a lighter brown around his face and where the wing meets the breast. And then I'm also working with wet into wet. So you can see I get an area wet with a bit of paint, and then I add more and often darker paint into the wet area, and it bleeds out really naturally. And that is great when you're painting animals. To get that watercolor look is very helpful. So let the paint seep out into a wet area and just let it be. And then we'll add a black eye, maybe with a little highlight if you can manage it. And then we will use that same black or very dark brown, and we'll go over his tiny thin little legs, nothing special there. And then for the beak, paint the bottom first, do it really, really, really dark. And then you can lighten the paint up ever so slightly with a bit of water and use the lighter black or dark brown for the top of the beak so that you can see the difference between top and bottom. And then you're going to take that beak up and do a few random little brush strokes to give the look of the dark feathering around the beak and around his eye as well. Okay, and we're gonna let him dry, and now that everything else has dried, what I want to do to finish our piece is simply come back in with some darker paint, and we're going to add detail. So starting with the branches, I'm adding just some veining down the center. I'll do a line and then maybe a couple other lines there. So keeping it really simple, but adding a bit of detail to everything is what is going to make our illustration really pop today. So once the leaves are done, maybe we'll add a bit of detail to our pine cone. You can see I'm just using a darker paint to give it a bit of texture, to make it look a little more textured, but that pine cone is pretty basic. And then I'm using a darker brown and just adding a bit of shading on the snowshoes, so we'll make them look a little more three-dimensional. But again, I'm not overthinking it. It's not perfect. It's not like a perfect light source. Really just adding some darker paint. Very random. Same thing with the mug. I had left a highlight in the top right, so I will do a little bit of shadow in the bottom left, a bit of a darker taupe color there. And then I also wanted to add a bit of speckling, because you know I love a good speckled glaze on my pottery. And so we'll do that. And then the bird has started to dry now, so I'm coming in with the darker brown and adding some more vertical brush strokes, still leaving lots of space between each one so that it looks like feathers. It looks very textured. I might add a little bit of a darker ivory color around his face. And then this is important, I added a wet paint there, very, very light wet paint. And now I'm coming back in with black, and doing this spotting, and some of the spots are bleeding out because the area was damp. And I think that looks really nice. Some of them are on a dry area, so they are just going to be exactly what I lay down. And then a bit of this black is going onto a wet area, so it's going to bleed out. And I think that's, again, so important when you're painting animals, is to think about your wet into wet to get a really natural color look. Okay, last thing, I have a slightly darker ivory color, and just mixed a bit more gray and brown into my ivory, and I am doing those heart designs that I initially drew on my sketch. So I want it to look like kind of a cable stitch mitten, but I don't want to get too detailed with it. So these sort of heart shapes down the center, plus a little bit of a crisscross pattern, can really make your ivory mitts look like they are knitted. And of course you could do this with any color. If you wanted to do red mittens, paint them in red, and then do like a light burgundy design on the top. And yeah, this is pretty much all done. I really enjoyed painting and illustrating these wintry, cozy, pretty items that have nothing to do with the holidays, because at least in Canada, there is a lot more winter after Christmas, and I think we have to try to enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed painting along with me, and that you'll give this bird and these mittens a shot, because they're really not difficult and they're a lot of fun to play around with. Just a friendly reminder that my e-course on watercolor is now available. It is only $70 US, and a lot of you have already given me some great feedback saying that you loved it and you learned a lot. So thank you for that. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you Friday with a new tutorial. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.